Ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much for giving me the opportunity to talk to all of you today. Interestingly enough, I'm sure I would recognize a lot of the different names that are probably within this group. I've spent some time at Sunnybrook, so I've got a lot of appreciation for all of the amazing work. And more importantly, I want to thank Ahmed for inviting me to this MedVentions seminar. It's always a treat to see how the MedVentions program is growing leaps and bounds every year. So just a quick word about the Toronto Innovation Acceleration Partner. So this is the organization that it's one of my roles that I have. And, our job is to basically help commercialize technologies that are coming out of the university ecosystem. And to give you an idea of kind of the programmatic offerings that we've had, we've made a transformation over the last, I'd say 1 to 2 years, and we're really focusing on early stage assets in the biotech sector, along with programs like UTest and really churning out startup companies in these fields. So we have 3 main programs. The first program is Lab 150, which is basically a small molecule drug discovery program where TIAP has partnered with a German CRO by the name of Evotech. And the job here is to identify early stage molecules and see if they're promising enough to go into a program that is monitored by both TIAP and Evotech to eventually create an asset with value in it that eventually turns into a company, or it's an asset that is licensed or acquired by a larger biotech. So that's one program. The other program, as Ahmed described, is UTest, and that's the one that I focus most of my time on, and that's basically an early stage incubator, and that's really a stepping stone or a foundation to help faculty, staff, and students turn their idea into an entrepreneurial venture. And I can tell you today's topic is one that we talk about quite a bit at UTest. And then the final program that we have at the Toronto Innovation Acceleration Programs is a program called Venture Builder. And that's an example of one where we see an asset and there's a need to turn it into a startup company right off the bat. So if any of you have any questions or comments about TIAP, please check out our website. It's tiap.ca. But without further ado, let's get into the business model canvas. So I think all of you, or most of you on this call, have probably heard of this tool. And I think I look back to when I was in undergrad university, and this tool wasn't around then. And I'm obviously dating myself from an age perspective, but I grew up in a generation where you wrote 100-page business plans. And in today's day and age of short attention spans, that doesn't really work anymore. I mean, there's a place for it, but I think what's amazing about this business model canvas is it's an entrepreneurial tool that really helps you visualize, design, and reinvent your business model. Because as you probably know, or as you'll learn in your own entrepreneurial ventures, when you first come across your business model, there's a pretty good chance that it's going to change a couple of times until you land on the business model that you're going to pursue. And so this business model canvas was created by a Swiss business theorist by the name of Alexander Osterwalder. Hopefully I didn't butcher his last name. But this is kind of his creation. And for many tools, for many startups, this is a tool that can help you develop a clear view of the value proposition, operations, customers, and finances that your business has. And I think if you were to quote Alex, I think the way he would say this quote, the business model canvas is a strategic management and entrepreneurial tool. It allows you to describe, design, challenge, invent, and pivot your business model, unquote. So I think, as I mentioned before, going back to it, when you look at the way people would interact with investors, 30, 40 years ago, you'd go to an investor and say, look, I've got the greatest thing since sliced bread. I'm working on this new MRI. I think it's going to make, a lot of money and it's going to add value to the public health system. And, the first thing that the investor says, well, show me your business plan. And that's where, you got to kind of go into your bag and pull out this, 200-page document that in a lot of cases, it's very concise, it's very important. But the truth of the matter is how many people actually go through and read each of those documents page by page. And more importantly, when you're starting off building your business, it can be a challenge to figure out, should I start actually investing time into it? So I think, if I'd use an example of, imagine if you were an entrepreneur today and you had 5 unique, digital health or medical device related ideas. Do you write a business plan on all 5 of these? Do you write 200-page documents for all 5 of these in order to figure out which one you're going to pick and pursue? My personal answer is no, that should not be the approach you should take. And I think the approach you want to take is to potentially build out 5 business model canvases for each of those ideas, and then kind of sit back from afar and evaluate all 5 canvases. And you could even have other people kind of collaborate with you, provided that the idea is not proprietary, and maybe give you feedback on, what we think as a group, idea number 2 is better than the other ideas, or idea number 5 has got a good cost structure, and that might be the one to pursue. So there's a reason why this tool, in my opinion, and this is one of the things that we tell startups that we work with at UTest, use the business model canvas as a tool. It's no different than a hammer or a chisel or a screwdriver. There's a specific need for this type of tool. And it really is an excellent tool from the early stage business planning perspective. And really this tool sets like an overarching framework for developing a business strategy and then eventually leading towards a detailed business plan that can help you kind of prioritize and action a certain plan. So, the other thing that's important is you can use this model as a way to identify how different components of your business relate to each other. And again, it's visual, so that's certainly helpful. And the other aspect of it that I find quite helpful for my own purposes is it helps you where you need to focus your time and attention as you start to grow your business. You may go through the business model canvas and identify weak areas or weak sections. Those are ones where you might want to sit down and look from afar and say, I think I might need some help in order to pursue this, as an example. So really, I think the main point here is what Alex has created, and I think this goes back to 2006, if I'm not mistaken. It's that the business model canvas helps you visualize what is important, and it forces users to kind of address key areas. And I think the other important thing is it can be used by your day-to-day team, whether it's your current, company-based team or advisors, to understand relationships and reach agreements. So let's look at this from a detailed perspective now. So an organization's business model has a number of components. And I think as I go through this, you're going to see me go through the business model canvas section by section as kind of a debrief, and then we'll get into a use case later on. I have a specific order that I attack the business model. And what I'd like to state right off the bat for all the listeners and the viewers is you can pursue and complete the business model as you wish. There's no right or wrong way. I'm just going to kind of give you my suggestion about how I go about it. And I think the best way to kind of typically execute the business model canvas is when you're doing it for the first time, just put bullet points. Start off in point form and go complete one section and move on to the next. And for today's tutorial that'll happen after this discussion, I think that's kind of the overarching message is it's not a good idea to get super detailed in the first pass. You want to get as many bullet points as possible in the section so that you can at least have conversations with your team members. And then the second and third iteration is when you can get really detailed around dollars and cents or demographics or whatever that may be. So in terms of the first section, we'll talk about the customer segments. And I typically go through these sections by just posing a series of questions. And these series of questions is what can help you answer or write down the bullet points that you need. So for customer segments, the first question is, identify who is your target. Who are you creating value for? And I think the question that comes up after that is, and this kind of ties into the purchasers, who are your most important customers? If you really wanted to get deep into the details of your customers, then you can get into what do they like? What do they need? What do they enjoy? What are their demographics? That's how you start to get more focused in on the customer segment. And then the other items that you can address in this section, and it certainly could be more detailed, is what is the customer market like, as an example? Are you targeting a small niche community, or are you going for gusto and you're going after a big mass market? So customer segments is typically the first section in the business model canvas that I attack. The second section that I usually go to is the value proposition. So this might be the most important section of your business because you really need to identify the core value that your business provides to the customers. If you don't know what your value proposition is, you're going to have a tough time selling what you offer, whether it's a service or a product. And the other part of the value proposition is what exactly is it that your company is giving to your customers? What problem is your company trying to solve? And what needs are your company satisfying for your customers? And then I think the other item is, how do you offer something that's different or that satisfies the demands of your customer? Is it based on price? Is it based on quality, design, or status? There's a lot of different ways you can go with value proposition. And when we get into the use case, you'll see that later on. The next section is channels. Now, channels refers to, put simply, how do you deliver your business offering to your customers? Whether you're a product or a service, how do you reach your customers? Do you reach them through snail mail? Do you reach them through online mediums? Do you set up a brick and mortar shop? What are the channels that you use? Are you selling through partnerships, sales partnerships, as an example? And then I think the other item of this is you need to consider your supply, distribution, marketing, and communication channels so that you can clearly articulate how this section can potentially affect your cost structure later on. And then I think the final point that I'll mention here is, these channels have a direct impact on your business's ability to be profitable. Because if you think about it, if you're spending hundreds of millions of dollars or thousands of dollars on, advertising online through Google Ads, as an example, well, that's a cost that you have to account for. And more importantly, in 6 months' time, after you've run those ads, you got to make sure that it's generating some money, or else you're not going to have money to continue. So that's kind of the channels section. The other section is customer relationships. And here is a good example of where you kind of have to look from a bird's eye view and say, what is the relationship that I want to have with my customers? So if I'm making, for example, medical implants for, heart-related activities or measurements, am I building relationships through senior citizen homes or senior care facilities or hospitals? And so you got to figure out, what is the relationship that you're having with your customers? Is it indirect? Is it direct? And how do you interact with your customers? And how does this differ amongst the different customer segments? Because, for example, you may need to communicate differently with one age category versus another. And then the other question becomes, well, how often or how frequently should you be communicating with the customers to begin with? And then the other item here would be, how much support does your company actually provide when it comes to fostering and curating these customer relationships? So the next item is key activities. And so here's an example of, I'd say, this is one where, it could actually make or break your business from the perspective of, well, what key activities do you need to execute or deliver so that your value proposition actually works? What activities set your business apart from others? And I think when we get into the use case, this will be very clear in terms of how it happens. And then, you got to consider how the company's unique differences in revenue streams, distribution channels, or customer relationships affect these key activities. Another question that's important is, do you need to procure specific niche resources in order to execute these key activities? And the other, overarching question is, with these activities, do you need to streamline things to keep costs and prices low? And that's really a question that needs to be answered based on the type of business that you're building. The next section is key resources. And, again, just like key activities, what are the specific resources or assets that are needed and are necessary to deliver your value proposition? Classic example, if you're building a piece of MRI equipment or a pacemaker, or whatever it may be, Well, it turns out you're going to need engineering certification and regulatory experts on your team. So that's an example of key resource, because without them, you're not going to really have a product that'll hit the market. You need to consider what resources for your distribution channels and your revenue streams and how they would function. Additionally, you need to think about what resources are needed to maintain your customer relationships. Does your company require a lot of capital or human resources in order to deliver their product, as I was mentioned before, with regards to regulatory personnel or engineers, in the example. Key partners, this is one where, this is another one where it consists of, like, for example, do you have a lot of important suppliers in your supply chain? Or, do you need individuals or groups who need to help champion your business offering? So a good example of this from the medical device world would be key opinion leaders. Do you need a key opinion leader to kind of stand up on a platform and say, this device works and this is the impact that it has? These are examples of key partners that not only do you need, but you may even potentially need to incentivize, as an example. The other thing is, what are the key resources does the company receive from these partners? How do the key partners deliver value for your company? And I think the other thing that ties into that is, what will these partners perform if they're considered key partners? And also, you need to think about why your company works with these key partners and the motivations behind this. I talked a little bit about incentivization there, but it could also be that, for example, in the medical device industry, it could be altruistic. It could be, look, this technology is going to save lives, and I'm a cardiologist down at a hospital in another part of the country, and I believe in this medical device, and I want to be a key partner to promote that. So that's an example of how the key partner is motivated to help the organization's business model. Now comes, in my opinion, a really, really important part of the business, because I'm more conservative in nature when it comes to building a business, and that's watching your cost structure. So identify the key costs in your company's business model. What are the major drivers of these costs? How do your key activities and key resources contribute to this cost structure? And then, obviously, if you're spending money, well, how does that relate to the revenue that you're going to generate? Because ultimately, that implies whether you're profitable or not. And then another thing is, I was mentioning with Google ad spending as an example for advertising, if you're going willy-nilly spending all this money, well, are you properly utilizing your resources? So understanding that aspect of your cost structure, or filling out your cost structure to understand that, can actually help you properly utilize your resources. And then another important point is, what are your fixed costs versus those that change? For example, we all got to buy software in order to build out simulations or whatever it might be. That might be a fixed cost over time. Or, you might have human capital that comes in and comes out of your company. That could change over time. And then once you're done this section, from afar, you can say, well, is your company focused on cost control or value? And if you're focused on value, that should give you an indication that, you may need to go out and bring in more money, whether it's through revenues or investors, in order to achieve that value. And then finally, no surprise why I've left this last section as last one, it's the revenue streams. Let's just be honest. If you're going to build a business, you need to figure out the different ways your value proposition generates money for your business. Does your company have multiple methods of generating revenue? So easy example, Apple. Apple sells laptops. They sell iPhones, smartphones. They sell watches. They sell music. So the reason why Apple is a $1 trillion company is because they have multiple methods of generating revenue. And going back to the previous section around, is your company focused on cost control or value? In my personal opinion, I think Apple's focused on value because they've got so many ways of generating money. And then the other piece to the revenue streams is, what's your pricing strategy? Do you have a price point for your product or for your services? Is it a range? There could be multiple ways of doing it. And then through what channels do your customers pay? Do they pay you credit card? Do they pay you through invoicing? Is it, a subscription? That's another item that you want to highlight in revenue streams because it can help you identify the frequency at which money is coming into your organization. And then finally, how does your company, does your company offer multiple forms of payment? I mean, Bitcoin is now a form of payment for a lot of retail services. So that's something to keep in mind when you're building out your revenue streams. So, now you see this grid, and now from afar, based on all of those sections that we just talked about, this is now the business model canvas that pretty much everyone is using these days. And again, when you look at it from afar, there's a couple of benefits that I want to highlight right off the bat. Number one, based on that one visual, and typically, if you're going to do this, there's a lot of different tools. I usually print out the business model canvas on like a legal sheet of paper, so it's a bit longer. And I literally use a pen to just not jot down notes. And so what I have the ability of doing is I have the ability of focusing on one page. The other thing I can do is when I finish this business model canvas, I can now go and get feedback from my teammates, from other individuals, advisors. And so there's an aspect of speed and agility to getting feedback and potentially correcting different pieces of your business model canvas. And I think what I like about it the most is I'm not a technical person. I never have been a technical person, but I surround myself on a daily basis with technical people. This is a good example of using a platform, or I should say a tool, that provides a common language for everyone in the company to understand. So it doesn't matter if you're the HR administrator to the CEO, to the engineer, to the salesperson, everyone can sit down and look at this and say, okay, we've got a common tool to look at, and we can all argue, discuss, and it's a great way to start off the conversation for, we're going to start a business, and then eventually you can start tweaking it over time. So let's move on to the case study. When I was building this presentation a week ago, I thought, why don't I dig deep into like a really med tech device, MRI type of study, and then I thought to myself, why don't we just stick to something simple that everyone knows, just so that we can get through the exercise of going through this whole story. So I picked Fitbit just because I think it's common to everyone. Founded in 2007 by James Park and Eric Friedman. Both of them saw the potential for using sensors in small wearable devices. And interestingly enough, they were able to raise about 400 grand back in, I think it was 2008, from potential investors. And, if you looked at the prototype that they had at that time, it was basically a circuit board in a wooden box. And, fast forward to what we're looking at in these pictures, that certainly is not a circuit board in a wooden box. So this just gives you an idea of the imagination and the salesmanship, or should I say the salespersonship of people like James Park and Eric Friedman. So I think in 2008, they did a soft product launch at TechCrunch 50 conference, and turned out to be a runaway success. They secured 2,000 pre-orders based on that prototype that I was just talking about. And with this early success came a lot of growing pains. And I think if you look at some of the interviews from back in the day from James and Eric, by the way, I don't know them by first name. I'm just doing that simply for the sake of this presentation. If you look back at some of their early presentations, I think what they've said is manufacturing was a big part of this, the struggles. And so they really had to figure out the cost structure, key resources, activities, and most importantly, the key partners in all of the different bits and pieces that are involved for putting this together. Fast forward to today, Fitbit's got streamlined manufacturing. They're a publicly traded company. And I believe as of last year, they were acquired by Google. So Google saw so much value in them that they just acquired them. And, it's interesting to think, 10 years ago, when you saw people wearing smartwatches for the first time, you kind of looked from afar and said, ooh, wow, that looks really nice. And now it's like a daily part of all of our lives. I mean, for me personally, it's a daily part of my life. So what we're going to do is we're actually going to go through the business model canvas for Fitbit. And what I'm going to say right now is this is a generic bullet point form, let's say first pass at the Fitbit business model canvas. The goal here is to show you how to do an initial business model canvas, which is what the MedVention students will do after this. We're not going to spend time into the minutia of details behind this canvas. But as I said before, once you finish the first bullet point pass of your business model canvas, it's up to you to get even more detailed. In fact, you can literally use online tools that expand that customer or that section that you're working on and throw in hundreds of different sticky notes. And you can keep going deeper and deeper into it. And I think the beauty about iterating this over time is when you have so much detail in your business model canvas, this is where the light bulb is going to come on and say, okay, we know what we're doing now. We're actually going to write our 50-page business plan now. And we have all of the detail, or I should say most of the detail that you need in order to build out your business plan. So I think in a lot of ways, this tool becomes a great foundation for eventually building your business plan. So let's pretend now all of us came up with a Fitbit idea back in 2006, and if we were, we'd all be millionaires right now. And we wanted to use the business model canvas as a way to visualize the business as a whole. So let's start off with the customer segment section first. So right off the bat, the first obvious customer is the active individual. These are people who want various levels of fitness tracking. They're clearly health conscious individuals who want to track information like sleep cycles. The second segment is, no surprise, it's the professional athlete. And when you look at the professional athlete, these are individuals that pay money, lots of money for therapists, trainers, chefs. And so it makes sense for them to have a device to track their everyday activities so that they can potentially get better at their livelihood. Another segment to carve out would be the busy parent. These are people that don't have a lot of spare time due to their day job and obviously their personal, taking care of family. And some of these individuals just have short periods of time to exercise. So they really do need a device that's accurate and gives them up-to-date information on how they're sleeping, how many steps they've taken, as an example. And so the next segment is probably one that would be familiar to all of you given your connections to Medventions. But who would have thought 10 years ago that eventually you could have a device on your wrist that can track heart rate, blood oxygenation, VO2 max, and more. A lot of the basic cardiac tools are embedded in a wristwatch, which facilitates research. And so the researcher, in my opinion, is actually a good example of kind of like an indirect customer segment, because chances are the researcher is building a project that would involve the use of a smartwatch in a hospital or clinical setting, as an example. And then finally, similar to the busy parent, you've got your business professional. They just want a bunch of information at the flip of a finger, and they need it quickly because they're obviously busy people. So that's an example at first pass. Okay, that's how we tackle the customer segment section. So now let's jump over to value proposition. Fitbits are priced at reasonably price points that people can afford. This isn't a big ticket item unless you're going after the premium versions of the Fitbit, which I think can cost upwards to $1,000. But the general ones, it's about 150 to 200 bucks. And I've got one on my wrist right now, and I think I paid about 150 bucks. And it's great because it does what I need it to do, which is track my exercise, check my steps. So for me, this was an affordable unit. But more importantly, jumping to the next value proposition, what I love about this thing is it's durable. Like I've actually bumped into the wall a couple of times. I've dropped this. I think I've kind of passed this underwater, no issues. And it withstands most conditions that, the everyday person is dealing with. And given that we live in Canada, we deal with a lot of different climates. So it's a durable piece of device. Another aspect of the Fitbit is it's functional. You can easily access the health information, while you're checking your emails quickly or leveraging the app that comes with these types of Fitbit devices. You can always get more detailed level analysis from the data that's coming off of your smartwatch into your phone. Obviously, you got to do the Bluetooth connection and all that kind of stuff. But once that data is into the app that's on your phone, you're getting some detailed level information. You can track over your calendar, see how active you've been from one month to another. Kind of get into the gamification of tracking your health lifestyle. And then I think the other thing that most people find cool is it can be personalized or customized. Since Fitbit is trendy, it can be worn in different ways with a sleek design. If you want a different colored straps, you can go after that too. If you've got a big enough smartwatch face surface. You can even personalize it. So that's, to me, these are the 4 key items, in my opinion, that cover off the value proposition. Customer relationships. So here is something that I would say, I think there's one statement that summarizes this, and it's online communities. And so whether you're an athlete, a busy parent, or business professional, there's a large community of online users that share their information. And I think it helps foster brand recognition and usage of their products. So the mobile application adds a lot of value in this community building approach. And that's why I kind of, for the customer relationships thing, it's kind of one statement that really stuck out to me, which was online communities. And then in terms of channels, no surprise, you can go to Amazon and buy them. You could go into a Best Buy store, focused on selling electronics to purchase it. Or you could go directly to Fitbit's online store and buy one. Or, maybe you're walking in Sport Check one day as a general busy parent or business professional, and you saw the section for smartwatches and you bought it out of there. So those are examples of kind of 4 channels that Fitbit uses in order to get their products and sell their products. So now let's jump to key activities. In my opinion, I think maintaining their mobile app is definitely a key activity for them. It's a source of detailed data after your Fitbit transmits your info to your phone. And some people actually tailor their daily lifestyle to it. So I'll give you my example. I'm trying to lose weight and get into shape. And I make sure that I upload all of my day-to-day data because I don't leave Bluetooth on all the time. And I use that to track on a daily basis, what's my calorie count? How much activity am I doing? Am I doing enough activity so that I can actually start to get into a weight loss zone? So for me, from my perspective, a key activity is definitely the mobile app. And then customer service is actually another important one. From what I've heard, I don't own a Fitbit, I have a Garmin. But from what I've heard, their customer service has been very good, and they've replaced units quickly and in an efficient manner. And then finally, another key activity that I think Fitbit executes really well is they act as a conduit between users and other people or items. So as an example, you may have a fitness ambassador that, or a fitness trainer at your gym and says, hey, are you tracking your heart rate? Are you tracking how much you walk? You may say no, and then they'll say, well, why don't you try out this Fitbit? So these are examples of brand ambassadors that are specifically placed in gyms, as an example. Shoe companies, you buy a shoe, you don't know when to replace your shoe unless it's actually falling apart. And in a lot of cases, you can actually track your shoe usage by logging your activities, because it'll say, you know what, you're reaching 600 kilometers on your shoe. It's time to replace your shoe. So that's a good example of being a bridge between customers. The next section for key resources, no surprise here, it's going to be suppliers. If you just look at the product itself, you have sensors, you've got plastics, clasps, digital displays. You got to figure out where all the supply chain pieces are coming, and you got to make sure that they are properly identified and managed. The other item is intellectual. So, and I think this is something that the whole group at MedVentures understand. You've got to have engineers. You have to have design individuals. You need to have, senior management. So there's an aspect of intellectual resources, so really human resources in some ways, that becomes an important aspect of the intellectual piece of key resources. And then finally, I always think that a key resource is customer service, because great customer service can make a company build, lasting relationships with their customers. Next section would be key partners. So no surprise here, if you've got a smartwatch, it's got to be able to integrate with smartphones. So right off the bat, all of these smartwatches, Fitbit including, they integrate and they interact with Apple. They integrate and interact with Android. It's important to identify what the material manufacturers are, because you've got accelerometers as an example. You got to make sure that you've got the right materials in place. You need to have application developers too. There's a lot of apps that are being built for these smartwatches, and so they become key partners for Fitbit as an example. And then I think one thing that is not so obvious is, as an example, I think if you look back maybe a couple of years ago, Fitbit actually signed a sports deal with the Minnesota Timberwolves, which is a professional basketball team, and they basically supplied the whole team with Fitbits. Well, that's an example of a key partner because now all of those professional athletes are wearing the Fitbits, and people see that. Another example would be, Lululemon or, Under Armour. They actively promote things like Fitbit. And I think it's Under Armour that actually has a partnership with Fitbit as a key partner, as an example. So now let's move to the cost structure. And I think these ones will be quite obvious to the group in general. No surprise here, the hardware. We got to figure out how much all of these different pieces cost, and we got to figure out how we source all of these. And so there are price points and there's volume price points that need to be taken into account as you're building out the cost structure for just purely the hardware. But you know what? As all of you know, there's no hardware that doesn't interact with software, and so software is another cost. How much does it cost to actually put the software in place to make all of this hardware work as a smartwatch? And then, in order for all this to happen, you need to have human resources. I mean, this can potentially be the biggest source of cost structure, which is having a team of engineers, software developments, customer service, senior management. This is a large part of the cost structure. And then you've got marketing and advertising. So let's say you've got this amazing product and you've got an amazing team. How are you going to go about selling this? You got to make sure you take into account marketing and advertising. As I was mentioning before, the partnership with the Minnesota Timberwolves is a perfect example of using marketing dollars. So that's them giving up, free Fitbits for the basketball team. And then finally, simple example, and this is something you'll see with pretty much every company. Where is all this happening? Do you need a facility where you're manufacturing or putting together all these smartwatches? So you got to think about rent. So these are just general items, and obviously I've missed probably a ton of cost structure items, but this is an example of how you identify some of the cost structures for this section. And then finally, we're looking at the revenue stream. So Fitbit sells watches, as an example. Are they premium watches? Are they the low-end models? There's going to be price points for all of these. And, Fitbit does a great way of pricing all of these different products that they have, smartwatch products, so that they appeal to different categories of users. They also have accessories. You can buy the additional bands if you wanted to for your smartwatch. That's kind of how you customize different colors, as an example. And so these are examples of accessories that they can make additional money on. And then there's an element of licensing too. I mean, they may actually have some core technology inside of their Fitbit, whether it's through their intellectual property that they filed, as an example, that may be licensed to other companies for other reasons. With the explosion of digital health technology these days, I wouldn't be surprised if there are digital health companies that are licensing their VO2 max tracker or whatever it may be. So that could be a potential revenue stream. So this is now an example of a completed business model canvas for Fitbit. Now, this is a very generic approach to it. What I would say is, if we were all done at doing this business model canvas, now is an opportunity for you to go back to your stakeholders or your partners or whoever it may be, your team, and say, do all of you agree with this? Do any of you not agree with anything, or have we missed something really important? And this is where you have an opportunity to add more information. And what's great about this is this becomes the foundation of constantly iterating it. And at some point in time, you'll get to a very detailed business model canvas. And that's probably the point where you can say, well, maybe we've got the idea, maybe we've figured it out now. Now let's build out a business plan where you're actually putting pen to paper for a 20, 30, 50-page document that summarizes how you're going to go about building your business, and something that investors might want to see, as an example. So in terms of resources, there's lots of amazing things. That first link that you're seeing here, there's a book that you can actually buy. What I love about this book is it's very visual and it's simple and easy to read. If any of you are interested in kind of learning more about it, I highly recommend the book, because I have a version of it and I typically lend it out, and I think it's great. The Canvanizer tool is an example of an online tool that you can use to collaborate online and build out your business model canvas. And Mars Discovery District has a bunch of workshops on this kind of stuff. And I mean, you can probably Google this, but there are hundreds of YouTube resources that you can also look at. So those are 3 resources that I encourage you to take a look at. And with that, I have about 3 minutes left before my allotted time hands up. But I want to thank all of you for this. I know I talk really fast, but hopefully I kind of got across to you the purpose of the business model canvas.